All right, we are live on YouTube. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz. Dooovid is with me, as is our habit, on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we discuss issues of faith and politics and how they intersect at times. Dooovid, thanks for joining me as always.
Yeah, great. Hope everything's going well. And I just watched your interview, last interview, very interesting, nice guest.
Yeah, interesting guy. Talking about vaccine policy, mandate policy, that is, and other topics we touched on. Dooovid, I want to talk about, and you do as well, the most current issue in the news, which is the Kyle Rittenhouse trial in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and also the Arbery trial in Athens, Georgia. I think, is it Athens, or it's in or suburban Atlanta?
Yeah, I don't even know. And I just
Okay.
mentioned that they just started jury selection for the Ghislaine Maxwell trial also.
Ghislaine Maxwell. As far as Rittenhouse goes, this is being portrayed as a race issue. I don't understand the racial component to it. I mean, here you have, to the degree it's racial, it's actually not what by conventional definition, because this is a situation with this teenager, Kyle Rittenhouse, I think well-meaning, went across the border into Kenosha, where his family's from. I mean, we're talking about right nearby. And he tried to help businesses, particularly Black businesses, that were being looted, and Black neighborhoods which were being burned to the ground by these terrorists, and to pick up the garbage and to help people start to dig out from this pogrom. If we were to apply conventional standards to the people who are doing this, we would, as at least standards as of today, we would have to say that they were white supremacists, because they were burning Black businesses and looting Black neighborhoods. But of course, they're not portrayed that way, because they are part of Antifa and Black Lives Matter. And as such, they are the communistic shock troops of the left and of the Democratic Party. So because of that status, Kyle Rittenhouse was called a white supremacist. And because he was defending himself, he's called a murderer, which I think it's quite clear it's self-defense. I mean, the video all shows that. And because he had a legal gun while the other people had illegal guns, it's called a Second Amendment issue on his part. So you have, I would contend, a lot of lying going on by the media on this issue. And in fact, Alan Dershowitz just weighed in on it, saying just that this is that he's self-defense, and that he should probably sue the major media for lying. This constant stream of lies about him and about the situation. And I think that Dershowitz compared it to the Covington High School kid who was smeared by the media and almost put him and his family's life in danger with these complete lies. And he ended up settling out of court and suing for hundreds of millions of dollars. I hope that Kyle Rittenhouse, God willing, everything goes okay and he's acquitted, or it's a mistrial. He does the same thing, because the media has to be brought to account when they lie. There has to be made an example of. They have to pay a price for this kind of propaganda. And that price should be pretty steep financially, so that next time they do this to someone and they decide to hold them up in the form of an auto da fe, a complete smearing, they might think twice about it. What do you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's always been that way. It's been like that, ever since I remember. So it's like, of course, the media isn't really news. It's propaganda trying to push a left-wing narrative. And I mean, I saw, Joel Gilbert's the Trayvon hoax, where he demonstrated, pretty conclusively,
Yes.
that they used false testimony, that Trayvon Martin's girlfriend
Yeah.
was not the one that testified, and they purposely used a false testimony, and how that was connected to Democratic politics. So,
Hey,
so I mean,
not only false testimony, they actually doctored the video to make it look like it was a race issue. And the fact that the guy that killed Trayvon Martin, and I'm not defending that, he was not even white. I mean, he was Black, basically, or he was like,
He was a
Hispanic black.
half Hispanic, half
Yeah,
Germanic, and Cal Rittenhouse. I mean, actually, is the least white person. He's also half Hispanic,
is it?
half white, as opposed to the defendants who are
Well, it's
all
this narrative they want to,
whiter than him.
yeah, and then
So
there's
it's
this kind
just
of
what
racist
they call
narrative.
clown world, where
Yes,
at this point it's not even believable. Like in the Trayvon Martin, maybe they were able to withhold certain pieces of information and make the narrative look believable for
right,
election politics. At this point,
exactly.
the narrative isn't even believable, and even the Ahmaud Arbery case, where it's unclear whether race had anything to do with it. I mean, obviously, someone got shot,
Right.
and but whether the likelihood that he was shot because of racial issues
It's questionable.
is questionable.
And also with that issue, I mean, first of all, you bring up Trayvon Martin. That was the first case that I really started to become aware of the fact that the media is twisting things to the point where they're lying and they're distorting as a way to fit a particular narrative. And in that case, it was an indirect way to hurt Mitt Romney in the
You might be able to
2012.
get Joe Gilbert. I don't have his information.
Yeah,
I mean, he's done a
I
lot. I'm
know
not
who
sure
he
if you
is.
heard,
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, even God forbid, Dylan Roof, the person who shot up a black a church, God forbid, said that it was the Trayvon Martin case that was the first thing that got him thinking of doing such a horrendous thing. And
well, I don't know about that, but I mean, obviously, one of the worst.
well, I mean, I'm just saying that he said that in his. I saw in the Gilbert documentary, but when he was being interviewed by the police after they caught him, and asked him why he did it, he mentioned the Trayvon Martin case, and it was kind of an egregious example. And I'm not saying like like personally, I think Rittenhouse, okay, even if it was self-defense, he's not guilty of murder. He should have some
Right.
sort of punishment for discharging a public firearm. To say like, even if it's completely self-defense, like you
Sure.
can't just shoot a firearm and kill people in public just because it's self-defense, or you just like, yes, it was self-defense. And the guy attacked me, so I was able to kill him in public, even though it caught reckless endangerment
Right.
of countless people. So I mean, I wouldn't,
No, and there are
George
questions
Zimmerman
about
in
why he
any of
was
those
carrying.
cases.
Oh,
Even
no,
Trump
no,
said it.
it's not black and white. I mean, it's not cut and dried. I mean, I would wonder
Trump
why.
himself said that back after Trayvon Martin. He said like Zimmerman self-defense in that sense, but he's no saint. I mean, he's not a
Oh,
good
no,
guy.
no, these are very complex cases, but
Yeah, I wouldn't say like
the
Rittenhouse, like
nuances are
he's no
shared.
saint, he's no good guy. And if he got a few years in prison for public endangerment, I would probably support that.
Right. I mean, I don't know the details. My sense is that he is a good guy and that he was defending himself against people who were, these are really dangerous
He
thugs.
was running down the street. He was running down the
Yeah,
street
running away from people who
with
were threatening to kill him. I mean, even
well,
this
he
guy that
ran. No, I'm saying he
testified.
ran towards he ran towards the garage. I mean, that he heard that people were lighting cars on fire
Right.
at the other place, and say it was actually I think Arab or Indian owned the car lots that he was protecting. But I'm saying,
Sure.
no, I mean, you saw the video. He was running like a madman from one place to another with his weapon, where he ended up killing
Yeah, but I think the weapon
first
was there
person.
for self-defense, and these guys were threatening to kill him.
But I'm
And,
just saying, like
and even the
this
guy
was
that
before.
survived
I'm
and
saying
testified
beforehand.
said that he
I
would.
watched the trial, saying like the facts are clear. The
What did you think
video.
of the testimony of the guy who?
I'm talking that he was at one lot, and then he runs to the other lot because his friend calls him and tells him he needs him there to put out fires.
Sure,
So I mean, there's
that's what
videos
he's there
of him.
for.
I'm not talking about after anyone attacked him, before anyone attacked him. He
No,
was running
that's what he was
with his
trying to do.
gun
So,
from one lot to the
yeah,
other.
but I don't think the gun was the relevant thing. He was trying to help people who were being looted and burned out by these Nazi thugs. But the question is that the guy that survived, who testified, said that he had, and proudly, that he would have killed Rittenhouse had Rittenhouse not shot
Yeah,
him.
I mean, it's just I don't think that has anything to do with what I'm saying. I'm saying that
Okay.
he reckless endangerment of the public, and he should get a few years in prison for that.
Okay.
And saying even self-defense, and saying like God forbid those people who died due to their own poor mistakes, but not that Rittenhouse should be
I
put in
don't
prison
think you and
necessarily
I
for
just,
killing those people. He should
yeah.
be put in prison for reckless endangerment of
Look,
the
I
public
think you and I,
at large.
we disagree. I mean, I agree that probably he was too young to be carrying that kind of a weapon, but I don't think he was recklessly endangering the public. I think he was defending himself against people who had every intention of killing him and would have had he not stopped them, which is self-defense. Anyway, on the Arbery case, that the problem with that one seems to me to be that these guys were taking the law into their own hands. They were like acting like vigilantes when they went out, because Arbery, there is video of him going into these houses that were being constructed. And I think it's reasonable to say that even if he wasn't stealing stuff, which he probably was, but who knows, he was certainly going onto private property, and he was doing this in several instances, and he was observed doing it. And so these guys decided to go out and enforce the law, which was wrong. They should not have done that. They should have called the police and let the proper authorities do it.
Well, that's where I
But-
disagree with you. I mean, it's funny that we disagree
Okay, yeah.
in these cases. I think like, no, I mean, they're saying like at some point the police, like in Rittenhouse, I mean, it's funny that that's similar thing, that the police were not getting the job done. Like we don't know the evidence yet, but if there was a neighborhood thief and they knew who it was, and the police were not doing their job of catching him, that yes, they did have the right to take the law into their own hands and detain this person, to chase them, and even to use weapons. That's not the argument that they're using, but if it were me, that's the argument that I would be using, saying they knew this guy was a thief, they knew that he was a regular thief.
I still am not sure
they knew that the
right
police were not catching him, so they took the law into their own hands.
I'm not sure that
and put a stop to it. So I mean, that would be the argument I would put forward. And I also say that's a reckless endangerment in the sense, but similar that if he ran because he was a thief, and that ended up costing him his life, that not because it was self-defense, but because they had a right to detain him for being a thief, and if he continued to run, that they had the right to use deadly force to detain him. That should be the argument they're putting forth, that they're not, and
All right.
whatever
I mean,
reason.
I think
And
you and
I
I
think
do-
even the law in
Interesting.
Texas and Georgia at the time says no, you have the right to use deadly force to stop a thief.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't understand. I don't know the intricacies of that law, and I'll have to think about this. But it seems to me that if, unless they were being robbed themselves, they don't have a right to go out and
In
enforce
Texas,
the
the
law.
law is at night. So the specific law in Texas is that, I'm not sure in Georgia, is that you have the right to shoot a thief who's running away at night. So it's weird.
Yeah, if they're robbing you,
if
they broke into your house, but you don't have the right to go out in the neighborhood and find somebody breaking into another house and then shoot them. That's the question.
Well, it's
So,
like George Zimmerman. He's saying they had a neighborhood watch.
well,
they shared videos.
his
They
job
knew-
was to
he
guard
said he
that
recognized the guy.
community.
This was the same guy he called the police on a few weeks before.
Well, that's different. He was hired to guard that community. I'm not saying that what he did wasn't an overreaction. It probably was, but that was his
I would
job.
argue on the point also, like, no, you have the right to form a militia and to use the militia to defend your neighborhood. And that's more,
Okay.
I'm libertarian on that matter, but
Yeah, I agree
think
with
they're
that.
different. And it's similar to the Rittenhouse. You're saying like the police were not doing their job. They weren't able to defend the property. So
Well, he had a right to
House-
defend himself. His
and
life
say
was-
that if that's the case, I'm saying we don't know whether Arbery was a thief or the exact scenario, but say that would be the defense that I would be
Okay,
putting forward, that there's
And it also
has a
bothers
right
me-
to get together, form a watch, and detain.
well, it
people
wasn't,
that
they
they
didn't
know are
really,
thieves.
they didn't really
And
form a
if the
watch. It was
person
just
tries
these two
to escape,
guys.
they have the right to use deadly force.
Okay,
God forbid.
all right, that may be. I mean, look, I mean, I get that, and I'll think about that. They weren't forming a force. They just were two guys going out and finding this, chasing.
We'll call, what is that? Say it's a militia. I'm saying that it's the First Amendment, Second Amendment.
All right,
Let's say it was their neighborhood militia. They have a right to have a neighborhood.
maybe if it was
militia.
an organized militia that was registered with the sheriff, then
Or
sure.
even registered, saying like, I mean, that's the
No,
point.
militias is
Second
what-
Amendment.
The term
mean,
well-regulated militia means that they register with the elected county sheriff, which I
His dad
support.
was a cop. I'm saying like.
Yeah, but they were not like a well-regulated militia that was was recognized by the county and to me, I
I think he
support.
was. I mean, that's the case. He was
Well,
on
that's
the
the
phone with
question,
the
I guess.
police. They were coordinating.
Or were they
with the
just
police.
vigilantes?
That's why, well, I'm saying that's why it took 4 months for him to be arrested, because they did have it
Okay.
coordinated with the police. He was buddies with the police officer. His father was a cop. He called the cops multiple times about the person, and saying the reason it took 4 months is because they thought that there was some sort of shady business between the police and the McMichaels, possibly racism.
Right. Okay. So then they're playing the race card, which may or may not be there. Probably not. As far as Ghislaine Maxwell goes, I think that it's reasonable to suggest that that Epstein was murdered in prison. Now I don't know that. I wasn't there, but
That has nothing to do with her
no, it
case.
has everything to do with it. And that he was, it's such a strange case, and that all the cameras were shut off. The
Yeah, I mean,
police-
there's plenty of evidence against her that has nothing to do with whether Epstein was
No, but it
killed.
has
The
everything
point
to
is,
do
the
with her
point is, did
partnership
she
with
commit these
Epstein.
crimes? And there's plenty of witnesses and
Yeah,
testimony
but
and
she was a
evidence against
partner
her that
with,
she committed these crimes.
understood, Dooovid. She was a partner with Epstein. She committed them with Epstein. She was serving as a sort of a grooming, young women and bringing them in. I mean, there's a pretty good documentary about this. And she was, having sex with them and just using them, and just a really horrible,
I mean,
individual.
she was a madam. She was a pimp. I mean, God
Yeah,
forbid,
exactly.
and of underage girls.
And the thing is that it does
saying
go to
maybe
the,
maybe she, it was a partnership with. But I mean, what does that have to do with Epstein, whether he was killed or not?
well, I mean, it goes to Epstein only because he was the senior partner in that relationship, and that he was,
That may not even be true. I mean, it could be
well,
she was the
whatever the
senior partner in the
he
relationship.
was, they ran.
I mean, it could be.
Epstein-
It could. It's very possible that it was her the whole time, not him.
Could be. Either way, they ran that island. They had the house in New Mexico. Which they had all these cameras. They were bringing in, well-known politicians and media figures and cultural figures and wealthy people, and filming them having sex and using that possibly as blackmail. They did have interface with both the CIA and with the Mossad, among other possible, deep state, intelligence organizations. And they did have international connections. It could be the tip of an iceberg that could have international implications. I don't know that. I'm just some schmuck here in Boston. What do I know? But, nevertheless, it
You should
looks.
know. He was right there in Harvard. He had an office. He had ID. I'm saying, in all likelihood, that Epstein was pretending to be a government agent at the Harvard building. In fact, like, I don't know if you know
Yes,
the Harvard layout where the
Yes.
Kennedy School.
He had an
Have you been
office.
to the Kennedy School of Business?
yes. Kennedy School of
that-
Government. Yeah, he had an
That
office in there.
Epstein's partner, I think Black or something, owned the building. That the Kennedy
yeah.
School of Business paid rent to Epstein. Epstein had an office, his own key, and Harvard ID. That's very possible.
And he had an
that
office
Epstein
in
was meeting with international diplomats under the guise of being a U.S. Diplomat at the Kennedy School of Business, and saying, I think till
Diplomat.
today, that the Kennedy School of Business doesn't own the
Government.
building. They still pay that guy rent.
Yeah, and there's something there that's been swept under the rug for sure. And there was
You know
connection.
exactly the building I'm talking about. Have you seen
Yeah, I
it?
do know the building you're talking about. It's the Kennedy
there.
School of Government, for sure. And also there's connections with MIT and this professor who was a major promoter of transhumanism, and that and Jeffrey Epstein was involved with this whole business of eugenics. He wanted to have women, impregnate women and have them develop a superior species, and he had to fertilize eggs in storage, and just very, very troubling and very strange stuff going on with him, and possibly with international connections, and very much, I think, an expression of this great reset, 30th century, fourth century idea that emanated out of the Economic Council of Klaus Schwab, and his idea that ultimately man would be a new species that would combine both biological and technological features. I actually have a chapter about this in my new book, Sociology for Conservatives. Now
I mean, Bill
available.
Gates is saying that
Bill Gates.
that Epstein had better connections than him, even when he was
Oh,
clearly
yeah,
the richest man in the world. He
Gates
said
had everybody.
that Epstein had better connections than he did.
Epstein had a lot of people on that island, including, I think it's a matter of public record, Bill Clinton and Hillary. And I'm not going to mention some of the other people, but they're very prominent people in our media and even on the Supreme Court, may I suggest. And
in your area, I mean, specifically MIT and Harvard,
Yeah,
the biggest
that's
names.
right.
Unfortunately, a lot of them are Jewish.
Well,
Our best names, like Marvin Minsky, and I mean, really some of our best names.
Yeah, I mean, it's too bad they were corrupted, or they were corrupting, either way, the point is they were part of this sort of general international cabal of the ruling class. Let's just put it that way. And Epstein served that, and that's what he was. He was an agent of that, and he was a tool of that. And that I think that his corrupt, pedophilic, prostitution, and who knows what else ideas probably pervade around the world. It's a lot bigger than people can even imagine, in my opinion. And I think that very well be why he is no longer alive. Let's put it that way. So you have you have Ghislaine Maxwell, his right-hand person, his whoever, who is the daughter, by the way, of Robert Maxwell, who is a very, very questionable media figure in Great Britain, who also died under mysterious circumstances. He fell off of his yacht off the coast of the Canary Islands. Some people might think he was pushed, who also had connections to both Mossad and the CIA. And that she was hobnobbing with the British royal family, as they both were, and Prince Andrew and all of them, and sort of the international elite. She's now going to go on trial. And I guess the question is, is she going to actually start to, spill the beans on some of this stuff? What do you think?
Well, my guess is that she only knows the God forbid dirty sexual secrets, and even Epstein was probably more finance. He was probably specialized in tax evasion, offshore money, and you talk like, I mean, Jay Dyer's actually going to be on Politically Provoked tonight. The show I'm trying to book you, and saying Maxwell, I believe, the father was involved in things like arms dealing,
right?
And so likely that,
Maxwell,
at the head of this is things like arms dealing and assassinations, and unlikely that Epstein was involved in arms dealings or assassination. He was probably involved just in the.
He was involved in
he was the book. I mean, he was the bookie, and God forbid the sexual perversion and,
that's right.
The blackmail, which
he
goes
ran
along.
the dirty.
But I say he wasn't the head of it, and saying that she's probably
not.
She's probably. I mean, if they were smart in running a good operation, God forbid, from a criminal perspective, she doesn't know anything about this stuff. She doesn't know who the assassins were, or the arms dealing, or any of this international crime. The only thing she knows about is who was doing perverted stuff, and so she might spill the beans on that. But well, I mean, God forbid, that's just that's just the really the tip of the iceberg, the perversion.
No, I agree.
Saying the serious crimes that were happening, even Epstein himself probably knew more about it, but no, I mean, he was probably just their bookie. I mean, his background.
I don't doubt that.
In finance, but her crimes are significant enough that even just perversion, especially underage prostitution or even kidnapping and grooming, that she should probably be in prison the rest of her life. And like, if even Epstein, that if he was killed, it was because, I mean, he wasn't the mastermind, and it's saying that he was just doing the tax and accounting and perversion stuff, and really, God forbid, there was much worse stuff going on that we may never know. And saying like Jay Dyer talked about that, and saying like, you're talking about arms dealings and assassinations and much more serious things than just low-level pimping.
I think they kind of, look, this is an opinion here, but I think that they sort of run this thing like the way they ran the Manhattan Project during World War II. The Manhattan Project was the project that developed the nuclear bomb that was eventually dropped on Japan. And the way that happened was that you had like a group in Chicago, you had a group at MIT, you had a group in Tennessee, you had the Alamogordo group. You had all these different groups, each of them working on a very specific thing, none of which knew the other thing. Nobody knew what the other people were doing, or even that they existed. All they knew was their own narrow lane. And yet that's
how Israel Mossad operates till today. But it's the only way to do it. You have to, I mean, even the army, it's, I always just need to know. And if I don't need to know it, I'm better off not knowing it. And presumably that's how they ran it. And
that's how the mafia operates. Anyways, there might be some masterminds behind it all who do know everything. We have no idea who those people are. Probably.
I'm saying it's unlikely. So like, no, there is
whatever it is,
no mastermind, because
it's just
you don't want to have someone that has all that information. So in likelihood, there is no mastermind. There is nobody.
That's how communism
all this
operates.
Information. Well, it's all everything. I mean, Mossad, the U.S. government,
but they were just people only knew what they needed to know, and they were part of this amorphous machine that kept moving forward. Everybody kind of thought alike. Nobody was the same. Everybody just kind of knew their lane. They thought the same way. I mean, my communist uncle, my late uncle, once said he was a member of the Communist Party back in the 1940s. And my father asked him, he goes, do you guys take your orders from the Kremlin? I mean, how does this work? I mean, I know you're loyal to Stalin, but, and he said, no, we don't take orders from anybody. We don't need to take orders. We know, we all think the same way. We just know what to do. And I think that's, how this thing works. And except in this case, we're talking about some of the most vile, and corrupt activities that are known to man. We can only imagine, and I'd rather not imagine what the hell they're into. All
There's
right.
also
So,
questions I mentioned, like how far the Russians have control in Israel, because that there's even like the other thing I want to mention about this Lebanese Arab that successfully,
we'll talk about that, Dooovid. I didn't get
by
that on
saying that
tape. So
there's been cases of
give us some
Russians
background on
that
that.
were able to infiltrate Israel, pretending
Sure.
to be Jewish, and even question you people think that maybe Israel or Jews subversively control other places, but from other perspective, you could think that maybe Russia
Russia
subversively controls large parts of Israel, and it's because of the nature of these things that you really can't know, because
right.
there is no mastermind. There is no person that you're going to find is going to tell you all the information. There's just pieces of information that you could put together and say, okay, like we both believe in God and Hashem, and basically the God of the Torah, but some form of higher forces that are probably directing this. So, like, humans are just pawns in the hands of higher forces.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that you make the case very well regarding Israel, possibly, and that there was a major influx of Jewish Russian settlers in the 1970s and 1980s, fleeing from the Soviet Union. People like Anatoly Sharansky, who became a cabinet minister, and some great people. But yeah, if you know what Russia's like, what the Soviets were like, sure, they probably threaded in a few spies and a few people who were going to work their way up, into the Israeli society. We're worried about that with the possible influx of Afghanistan refugees, most of whom are loyal to America. They helped us. They were interpreters. But yet, do we know whether or not the Taliban is threading in a couple of people to serve as terrorists? We don't know that. So, those are always possibilities. Now, what's the deal, Dooovid, with this guy, this Lebanese Arab who pretended to be Jewish to get American citizenship?
He didn't pretend to be Jewish to get American citizenship. It was in all the Jewish papers, mostly Orthodox, about this man who married. I guess it was in Lakewood, and it was a big Orthodox wedding, and they thought he was just like a Baltruva of some sort. And then it turns out that they looked into his record and see that he's 100% Arab, and lied about it. And he had admitted to lying about it. I mean, saying he came from Lebanon. His parents came from Lebanon in the U.S. Specifically for their son, that he would have a better future and be able to get into university. And once he was in, or maybe his parents aren't even here. And then when he was in university in Texas, he became extremely fond of Judaism, went to Chabad, became president of a student club, and got set up with a nice Jewish girl, and got married, because this guy was doing well in Jewish circles, looked like an outstanding Baltruva in many ways, but it turned out he was deceptive, and he wasn't Sephardi, and he was 100% Arab. And I think now the girl, so to say, is safe away, although he claims he wants to convert and still wants to be Jewish, and he loves Judaism, and he loves his wife, and he's sorry for lying. But from the Jewish perspective, it looks like, at least the papers, like some big fraud was committed. And there's a whole bunch of angles. One thing, just how unseriously a lot of Jews, especially American Jews, take our religion. We're talking like Russians infiltrating Israel, and there's been a few cases of it. You say, okay, there's Russians that speak perfect Hebrew, even though they're not, not even like patrilineal Jews, 100% non-Jewish. But saying, like, yeah, you don't have to be Jewish to learn Hebrew. You don't have to be
and
Jewish
they didn't convert either. We're talking about Russians who were not Jewish and in any way, no intention of being Jewish, but were posing as Jewish.
I mean, there's probably now 100,000 non-Jewish Russians or more. I'm saying that not even
Not that many.
part Russian.
In Israel?
Yeah, but there's
Is
hundreds
it
of
that,
thousands of
is
them.
they say it's that high a number? Because I know this is something that's been an issue, but I don't know if it's hundreds of
It's
thousands.
disputed the number, but I mean, according to the official rabbinate, there's hundreds of thousands of non-Jewish Russians in
Okay,
Israel. But, I mean,
sure,
they still speak Hebrew and they still serve
right, and they still
in the
serve the
IDF,
country,
and
and
to
they,
some
right,
extent, they're fully Israeli. They have Israeli
that's right,
citizenship. They
that's
pay
right.
taxes, and some of
And they're loyal
the power.
citizens, hopefully, most of them.
Yeah, but I'm saying just the fact that they're not Jewish didn't mean like they're dumb and it's impossible that they could learn Hebrew or even
No, well, they
know the
obviously
religion.
committed, they might have committed some fraud by claiming to be Jewish as a way to get out of Russia. They wanted to get out of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I mean, that's already 30 years ago, and a lot of those people eventually make their way to the
And
U.S.
make
But
their
he's
way
saying
to New York and Los Angeles.
that a complete non-Jew
Right.
could have, let's say, outcompeted his fellow Jews and rose to the top of the Jewish students in Texas, that he took Judaism more seriously.
Well, why didn't he convert to Judaism?
Well, I guess he felt it was
He
easier.
could have avoided this whole controversy.
He said that it started when people were just asking him if he was Jewish, and he lied and said that he was Jewish, and then at some point it got too
He just
difficult
didn't do it.
to
Well, that's
get out of the
irresponsible.
lie, and so he just kept going with the lie.
Yeah, but he was being irresponsible. He should have just, if he loved Judaism and he married a Jewish woman and he wanted to.
Well, he still does. He says he wants to
Yeah,
convert
but he
and
should
serve
have,
his wife.
he should do it. I mean, it seems.
Well,
to
at
me
this
to be-
point, so
Well, at this
now,
point, it's already been exposed as he
well, I
had
mean,
lied
what
about.
what happens now? It's saying I mean, he's living as an Orthodox Jew.
They should
He's
get, they
he's been
should,
doing
he
it
should,
for years now.
I would think that
What are
they
you going to
should
say?
be
You're
allowed
going to
to-
make a prohibition that he can't convert to Judaism now because he
No,
lied?
I would think, no, I would think that he should be forgiven for it and then properly converted to Judaism.
And stay with his
Whatever
wife?
happened to teshuva? Yeah. Whatever happened to kindness? I mean, he's married to this woman. He has a life. He does love the faith. He should be allowed to convert to Judaism and encouraged to do that. No one's.
I mean, I remember, God forbid, I was in university in Chabad in Stony Brook. The rabbi was like, yeah, it's like it's a lot easier to get non-Jews interested, than Jews. That you kind of have to shoo away the non-Jews who have interest in Judaism,
Oh, yeah.
and you have to like coerce and bait and switch the Jews to be interested in Judaism. So it just questions the approach of Kirov in general. And I even mentioned, like, I said to you, we've disagreed quite contentiously in the past that Israel should probably end the right of return for American Jews. And now you're looking at this guy who loves Judaism, who's dedicated years to it, learns Hebrew, is willing to do the religion, that he probably will not be able to make it to Israel,
Well, he
as
should
opposed to your average American
Yeah,
Jew
but look, when I was in,
who despises Israel,
Yeah, but
who
this
has no
is-
interest
this-
in our heritage,
I
but
understand.
has the right of return.
Look, I understand that this is anecdotal, but when I was in Israel working on a kibbutz back in the late 1980s, this was a kibbutz, an Orthodox kibbutz that was involved with conversions, and a lot of the people there were not Jewish. I actually befriended this guy who was Danish, who's Lutheran in background, who was converting to Judaism. He was very, very fervent about it. He really believed in it, even to the point where he actually had a circumcision as an adult. I mean, this is a big, that's real dedication. And he, he was becoming a Jew. I mean, this is something that happens. People do get involved, and it always have. I think that's fine.
Well, we discussed it. It's more difficult for an Arab, or even for Lebanon, and with the security
Right. Well, because they're
status
worried about
currently in
loyalty.
Israel.
Sure.
That, but this case brings up a lot of problems in the current state of Jewish America, Kirov politics, of saying trying to get Jews more interested about our tradition and teaching them, and then at the same time trying to get non-Jews less interested in it. And then also the racial component. I was on a Discord. I want to talk about possibly what's going on in Politically Provoked. They're interviewing
Okay.
Jay Dyer and setting you up, but I got on this Haredi Discord, and they were all bashing me because they there's like hundreds of Orthodox Jews that thought that we should live in isolation, that we shouldn't really have interaction at all with non-Jews, not even like, I was even arguing basic things like business, but I'm saying, like, no, this is pretty popular, saying like like the current state of Republican politics in terms of politically provoked, had this really big debate this week on the Great Replacement, where Destiny. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this gamer, popular leftist debater, but they say he lost to this white nationalist on the Great Replacement. And they've been having these debate on Saturday on secession, like American kind of like right wing pro-whites or pro-blacks that are arguing in favor of secession, but saying in Israel, like no, I'm talking with Israelis, and they're saying like secession, like we should completely break off from non-Jews, and it's kind of
That's
like
a very tiny minority.
I don't think so. I say like your
Isn't that like the
statistics
people that live in Newtown, and this is like a
No,
real.
I'm talking about Israelis, and I think it's probably 20-30%, maybe more, of Israelis that just like, we don't want any non-Jews around. We don't need them. We don't want them.
Yeah, okay, well, that's that. I mean, what do they want to evict Arabs and non-Jewish Israelis? Is that what it is?
Well, I mean, they want to convince people like me, or to stop doing what I'm doing, stop trying to talk, or
I mean, people like you.
well, I mean, because I'm technically Jewish, like they
Right.
would probably include me, although some might not. Just saying like,
I mean, they'll question your lineage kind of thing.
well, I was saying these are ones that would have included me, at least in the Discord I was talking to,
Okay.
and it's saying just move back to Israel and give up on this stuff. So, like Charles, give it up, just move to Israel. You're not helping anybody. Like
Well, there's always been a strain in Israel of like all Jews making aliyah to Israel, and that does have a religious component as well as a nationalist component. This idea
saying
that
and then
the
that Israel
ingathering
should
of the
be.
exiles, that's just part of the ethos of Zionism. I mean, the idea that all Jews in the world will eventually come back to the homeland, and that will usher in the Messianic era. That's kind of a standard. I mean, that's fairly open as part of Zionism.
If you look at
Both
two
liberal and
states for two
conservative, I think.
people,
That's not even like,
if like the commonplace, what I always saw as a kid, and it didn't make sense to me, 2 states for two people, it sounds pretty similar to people arguing for secession here in America. They're saying 2 states for two people. And so in America, it's like, no, well, of course you don't have 2 states for two people. You can't succeed.
in Israel,
As opposed to in Israel, that even your mainstream left, American politics, that's their mainstream position, is secession, 2 states for two people.
Well, when they're talking about 2 states, they're talking about the West Bank and Gaza. Is that what they mean?
We're talking about Palestinians and Israelis, and saying most of the people debate now, they're talking blacks and whites. But I mean, essentially what they're saying.
Are they saying Israeli Arabs, non-Jewish Israeli Arabs are going to be separated? Is that what they're calling for?
Well, I'm saying your average leftist in America, when they say 2 states for two people, just means the West Banks, and then that Arab Israelis.
That's what I thought it meant.
Would be treated. But it's like even left-wing Israelis, even organizations like the ADL and AJC and federations in America will openly talk about the demographics, that Israel has to be concerned about demographics. And
Sure.
2 states for two people, so that Israel.
And their solution is to what? Kick out Israeli Arabs?
Well, I mean, their solution, so to say, is to secede and separate Israel into 2 distinct countries, one for Arabs, one for Jews.
Yeah, the 2-state solution. I get it. I mean,
So I was saying that if you put it in that,
that's actually a very establishment view.
I mean, so they had a big debate this week on secession in America, and that's basically what they're saying for blacks and whites. They're saying 2 states for two people.
I don't think anybody's saying that in this country. I mean,
I'm telling
other
you,
than
big
maybe
debate on Saturday.
I mean, in the 1920s, that's what the Communist Party was pushing for.
Well, you interviewed Richard Spencer when he was saying that, and saying that's what he was saying. He was saying 2 states for two people.
That's real fringe stuff. That's
not. I'm saying don't give me this crap that you don't think anyone's talking about. You interviewed.
Yeah, sure,
when he was going around the nation.
When I say anyone,
for two people.
Dooovid, when I say anyone, I mean anyone of significance. I mean, those are fringe, stuff on the far left and the far right. That's not, the 99.9% of Americans aren't thinking that way. In the 1920s, you had the Communist Party pushing this idea of a separatist black state, which would be in the South in majority black counties. They called it the Black Belt. And this is maybe part of like the Louis Farrakhan type of thinking, Nation of Islam. It's not at all mainstream in the black community or white. It's just not. And maybe you get people on the far right, like a Richard Spencer, sure. But that's not something that's that's embraced by any significant element of our culture.
I think it's rapidly. I mean, you're right. Like historically, maybe it was probably less than 1%, and maybe even like 5% that would even have leanings to even think of it. But I think it's increasing. It's
I don't think
probably
so. I mean,
it's probably
maybe
as high as 10%. And then with these cases like
10%
Arbery
of
and
Americans
Rittenhouse,
want to separate from blacks and whites in this
want to
country.
want to. I mean, I even mentioned a few weeks ago the abortion, but for various reasons, not necessarily racial. The only one
Right.
that think
Maybe there's,
America
yeah, there's a, that
America
I,
needs to be split up
yeah, that's,
into separate countries because we can't. I mean, the union can't hold. And you know, I'm not a Civil War scholar, but you know, like at some point, maybe only a few fraction of the South wanted to secede, and then you know, but there was a critical
and it
mass at some point
snowballed,
where
yeah.
they did secede, and you're saying the warning signs are coming, and I'm saying on the internet now of the younger people, the people that look at the news and say, or the politics, and I don't believe what these people are saying. There's no value in what the system's telling us, that we could be reaching the point of secession,
I agree.
and it's like
It's
these
not going to be
trials
based on race, though. It's going to be based on Trump supporters and Trump haters
well, I mean, at the end of the day,
at the end of the day.
it's likely to be red and blue, and the most notable factor dividing red and blue is racial. That the red areas are majority white, and the blue areas are majority multicultural. Even though there's different issues
I'm not sure that's
involved,
true.
but it's saying if the split is on red blue political divide, that the red blue political divide overlays.
No, I reject that. I mean, that's a smear that the left pushes.
No, I'm saying that's a fact. Like I could do a screen share of the map of census data.
Yeah, I think that
of red blue data with the census racial data.
No, that's there are increasing numbers of Black people support and people of color are supporting the MAGA movement. And I would suggest more than a few numbers if you really did an honest count of the vote. I don't want to get into that because I'll get banned on YouTube. But I mean, even today, there's information coming out about Pennsylvania and Wisconsin showing video evidence of people destroying votes. Now, I don't want to go into this subject.
Yeah, but you're talking about statewide elections. I'm saying that
I'm talking about the national election of 2020. Black people, you know,
you're missing
doubled his black vote, and I would
if you looked
suggest
at a
he
U.S.
tripled
or
his
state map of red versus blue, that the most notable correspondence is the census racial data, and it's saying you're talking about urban areas.
Yeah, but that division is reducing.
You could have Republicans in urban areas, but not enough that it's going to turn it red. Maybe
Yeah,
enough
but Dooovid, my position, my point
national
is that
election to get a Republican senator or Republican governor, but not enough to turn urban areas blue. That
I don't know
have
about
a
that either.
Republican mayor of Boston, for example. There's no way you're going to have a Republican mayor of Boston, although you might have enough people in the Boston area to vote
I'm not
Republican
sure
to
about
get
that.
someone like Mitt Romney as governor, and saying
That's
that
right.
if there was a split in America, some form of secession, it would likely be the red areas seceding from.
Yeah, but it's not, but my point is, it's not really a race thing because I would argue
I didn't say
that,
it was necessarily a race thing. I'm just saying that the
yeah,
borders,
but that's
that the likely places where places would switch would be red places seceding from blue, and that the racial demographics are one of the key divides.
And
that
by the
make
way, it wouldn't
red
even be a
areas red.
state thing either, because you have basically rural areas, suburban areas that tend to be so-called red. In California, for example, most of the state's actually red, but the big city population centers are controlled by these Democrat machines, and they
And
tend
what's
to.
the racial demographics of the rural places in California? They're
It's not,
mostly red.
it's not as relevant, and I'll tell you
Well, I
why.
mean, just what's the
Because
answer? What's I mean,
The answer
you know,
is less so.
I've looked at it. I mean, saying,
No, the answer is a lot
what's
less
the
than
census racial demographics
My answer
of the red
is,
areas in California?
my answer is that race is less an issue than it was.
I mean, do you know the answers to these
Can I
questions? Do I
please
have to
answer?
pop up a
No,
census map?
why don't you let me answer the question? If you popped up a census map, if you took a look at statistics, the answer is that race is less noticeable as an issue than it was 20 years ago, maybe even 10 or 5 years ago, in that people of color are no longer goose stepping along to the left like they did. There's a huge shift going on right now in this country, even this year, among people of color, and also, by the way, amongst, I think, millennials and other segments, that are moving away from the old corrupted, liberal blue state Democrat thing. And so yes, they still have a majority, but they have less of a majority than they did even 10 years ago. They are losing that ground. That's what they're so afraid of. That's why they despise Trump so
Yeah, but
much.
I mean, you're
And they
separating
tried to
issues.
lie about Trump by saying that he has something against Black men and women, which is an incredible lie, because they're terrified over the idea of more people of color, becoming awakened and leaving their, the leftist plantation. And that is what's happening, I would contend. I think stats show that Trump did much better among the Black vote, and we're not even talking about votes that might have been suppressed, okay, in the big cities.
You're
Even
mixing
even
issues.
even the official Black vote, he did better, I think, than any Republican candidate since Eisenhower. So that is changing. I don't think that the breakdown is based on that. It still is technically, but those numbers are reducing pretty rapidly. The breakdown is between the elitist liberal left and their big fat machines and political machines in the big cities and the rest of the country. And those big liberal machines who put Biden in office, they represent the top 1% wealthiest. They represent the high ground of our culture, of our media, of our business community, of our academia, and they are the ruling class. And I think more and more people are becoming aware of that. And they probably could push this idea of secession because conflict serves their interest. One of the things I get into in my book, Sociology for Conservatives, is I talk about conflict theory. This is one of the major schools of thought in sociology. And it comes from Marxism. It's cultural Marxism, the idea of dividing people up into categories and then pitting them against each other as a way to increase centralized power. That's what's going on here. That's what this talk is all about, of dividing the country up and seceding from the Union. Most people don't want that. Most Black people don't want that. Most anyone doesn't want it. This is an elitist agenda. It's part of the sociology, the critical theorists who cook this stuff up, in their social labs, and then they promote it through their media organs.
Instead of stop telling people what they think, you step into the arena and debate the people that are saying this.
Yeah, but the people that are saying this are either tools of this high level establishment or they're nutcases like Richard Spencer. They don't matter. The people that actually, the average person on the street. No, your average person on the street doesn't believe this. We're not in favor of ripping the country apart. This is something that is being manufactured by sociologists, probably, I don't know, or just by elitists, because they want to keep us divided because they're terrified over the idea, frankly, of minorities moving into the MAGA movement. That's why they did the smear, these lies against Donald Trump as having something against Black people. Completely false, and yet inflammatory as a way to demonize not only him, but all of his followers and create emotional divisions. And to an extent, it kind of works a little bit, but it's working less than it might have worked in years past because people are waking up.
And just to clarify on a factual basis, here in Michigan, according to census data, is about 75% white, 25% called non-white minorities. And of the 25% non-white minorities, 90% of us live in Metro Detroit. Mm-hmm. And geographically, of the 75% white, that 90% geographically of Michigan, maybe it's not 90%, 80% of geographic Michigan is over 80% white. So in the state house, but not also the who we send to Congress, but specifically in the state house and the state Senate, that 60% of districts are 80+% white, and that's why the Republicans control the House and the Senate, because the geographic, and that as said, like 80% of the state geographically is mostly white, and if that corresponds to like 60% of the congressional and Senate state seats, that those are all red, and there's not necessarily a big move of non-whites into rural areas. So they're saying that even with
Yeah, but there was a
population,
significant,
and not even necessarily if they're allowed to, and we could, and we'd be welcome, but there's not necessarily the big desire of minorities to move into rural areas.
actually,
That's why you
no,
have
but they're moving
the
out.
so-called gerrymandering. Yeah, but I'm sure in Boston and Massachusetts also, but the state houses and Senate, have this geographic reality that most states, I mean, whether the demographics, but states that have a white majority, that white majority is that most of the non-whites live in urban areas.
Yeah, but that's changing. I mean,
It's not changing. It's saying
yes,
that
it's
there's not a
changing in
big move.
Boston.
There's not a, but I'm saying it's not changing that there's a big move of minorities to urban areas.
No, there's a big move of minorities to more suburban areas,
But
particularly
not to
after,
rural, not to rural areas.
maybe not
I'm saying
rural,
to the
but
75% of Michigan
okay,
that's
fine.
red, there's not a big move of
Maybe
blacks
not, maybe
or
not
other or
rural,
Mexicans.
because no one's
or-
moving to the rural areas. People are leaving the rural areas, and that's a whole different subject. But there is a
I
general
mean,
move,
that makes up the base of red America is these rural
it's
areas
rural
that
and
are
suburban.
75,
And I
80,
think that in,
90% white.
and in Boston, for example, I think there
I mean,
is
Michigan, they call it farmland, but maybe farmland,
whatever.
but to say that farmland
Yeah, the
controls
farmland is losing all
farmland
of its
controls over
population.
half of the house, the state house and
Yeah,
state
and they're
senate.
losing population. But the point is that in the city of
Well, that's why
Boston,
they call it
Could I
gerrymandering,
say something here?
even with the loss of population.
In the
you
city of
still have-
Boston, there has been a general move, at least, I mean, maybe I'm going on anecdotal evidence here, but there has been a general move amongst African Americans and people of color into the suburbs, into the formerly, the more predominantly white neighborhoods. And there has been a move by white people into what were predominantly black neighborhoods in Boston. So there is more natural integration gradually. Now, I don't know if I can't speak to cities around the country, but I can speak about
I mean,
Boston.
you're missing the point. That's not the red area. The red areas are the rural areas.
No, that's not necessarily.
There's a
Look,
demographic.
the red
shift of maybe
areas
the white
actually-
suburbs and
No, I
and the black
disagree.
urban areas.
The
that
red
blacks are moving to
areas
the
are-
suburbs and whites are moving to the urban area, but
No,
there's
no.
no real
No,
big
but I think that
demographic
the-
change in rural areas. The
The
rural
red
areas
areas
still
are
majority.
all of the area except for these big corrupted cities like Detroit and Philadelphia and New York and Chicago, and to an extent Boston and Los Angeles and San Francisco. Those are the core of the hardcore blue areas. I would suggest that is changing. That's why
Is there any major urban center in America that's not hardcore blue?
Probably not. I mean, well, maybe there might be a few. I don't think so. I think that, but the suburbs are more red, and certainly you're right. The rural areas are more red. The real hardcore blue areas are the big cities, because that's where you have these corrupt machines that control things, and they control the vote, and they control how the votes are cast. They've been in control of those cities for decades. And
So what would
that,
secession look like if it happened?
what I'm suggesting is that
We're saying that if something like secession
It ain't
happened in
gonna
modern day
happen.
America, what would it look like?
it wouldn't look like anything. It ain't gonna happen. It's a phony, cooked up idea by people on the far right and the far left, and probably by our elitist establishment to create division. That's my position on it. It's
Or maybe
not gonna,
international, like China or Russia, they're fomenting.
probably,
this.
yeah, they very well may be. Russia, China, Iran, who knows? They could have a hand
Okay,
in
we'll
it.
step into the arena because it's saying that the number of people
The American people
supporting
don't
these
want it.
ideas is increasing.
I
The
don't
number
know.
of people willing to debate and talk
Even
to these
people
is
who are-
decreasing, and just
Look,
like you
I
will
would
these
suggest that
people
even,
lunatics and not
Look.
talk to them as their numbers keep increasing.
maybe I'm again operating in I'm speaking anecdotally here, but I live and operate in a very, very ultra blue environment. My family, my synagogue, my friends, my colleagues, my neighborhood, all blue.
Yeah, I mean,
I
you're in
hope-
Boston.
Yeah, and I don't even know, most people don't even know I do this broadcast because I changed my name to do this broadcast. They don't want to be, people in my family are afraid of this. They don't want to be associated publicly with me because they might end up losing their jobs. They could lose positions. We're talking about real hardcore, soulless haters that run this culture in Boston. Ignorant people, timid, fearful.
I'm not even dissing anyone on either side.
I'm
To me, it's
dissing
just-
like
I
crazy
just
right
think that
now.
People
But
are
my point,
pursuing
Dooovid, the
their own
point I'm
interests.
making
There's
is
group
that
conflict,
among
and
all
people are
these
rational
people,
actors pursuing their own self.
among all of these people that I do come into contact with, every day, including people that I'm intimately associated with. I have never heard any of them talk about division of the country, secession. They don't, it's not even in any way on their radar screen. This isn't something that people are thinking about. This is something you find it cooked
I'm
up.
telling you, I'm the one on the scene. I'm the one, feeding you these contacts.
Excuse me.
And I'm telling you that there's millions of people and it's
I think,
increasing the
no, I
number
think
talking
that,
about it.
Dovid, with
And
due
I'm telling you, because
respect,
I'm out there on the scene. This is
yeah,
what
with
people want to
due
talk to me
respect,
about. People
Dovid,
that reach out and
I
want to
think
debate
that,
me, this is what they want to talk
yeah,
about.
I think that with due respect, Dovid, and I'm not saying this to in any way,
Now, I never met any of these people to their face.
I
These
think
were
this
people
has to do
reaching
with
out
the
to me on
circles
the
you
internet.
travel in.
I don't
It
travel
has-
anything. These are only people I know on the internet.
Yeah,
People I never
that's what
met.
I rest my case. This is the world you're traveling in, and it
I'm not
doesn't.
traveling in these circles. I'm saying these people
I'm
are
not saying
finding
you
me.
are. I'm saying that you're
And
people
you're the
that
one asking me to speak to these people and saying these people are finding me.
they are
and
finding you. That's
and saying
right, and
they don't. I
that,
mean, I
that
guess they don't.
reflects a
Because
certain.
I listen to them and try to express their ideas, what they're
Of
actually
it,
saying,
yes,
as opposed to you who just calls them idiots and crazies.
yeah,
That's
I
probably why they
do.
don't want to talk to you, because
Maybe they don't, and I
I
don't
don't
want to talk
agree
to
with
them.
them. But I'm just
I'll
saying like
talk to them.
this is what they're saying. It's
I don't
saying
want to
like, I'm
promote
not saying
their
like
agenda.
I think they're wrong. I'm arguing with them, but at least I'm expressing that
David,
there's some
they are
rationality
attracted to.
behind what they're saying.
No, they're attracted to you for a lot of reasons. I'm not saying you're part of it,
I'm
but
their opposition. I mean, all of them look at me as their opposition. They want to debate their opposition, and I'm the only one willing to talk to them.
well, I'll talk to them.
I mean, I guess because I'm not just going to
But the
try to
point
call
is,
them an idiot or have them,
I'll basically try
I'm
to debunk
trying to have a
them,
good faith
like I did with
conversation.
Richard Spencer, I might add. But the point is that yeah, I think that in the circles that you're exposed to, maybe that's the right word, this is what people are talking about.
How about you say
And
the
it's
circles that
not the real world. It's not the
I'm
massive.
arguing against on the internet, that I'm debating against
Fine.
all these, I'm debating
But these
against
people
them.
don't represent, they represent just a tiny fringe people. They're contacting you because you like to discuss all issues and you're open to it, whatever reason. The point is that they don't reflect the 99.999% of Americans. They reflect a few people, both, as I said, on the far left and on the far right. And I would argue people who are part of the establishment, like, for example, George Packer, who is the author of this major book on the sociological book, really brilliant guy. I mean, his book is great, except when you mention the name of Donald Trump, his hair goes on fire and he becomes crazy. But the point is, I think he's promoting this as something that people are talking about. And he's like a part of he worked for a socialist organization for 10 years. Now he's a New York Times bestseller. He's an establishment guy. And I think that they are promoting this agenda, frankly, because it does create a dialectical split in society. It keeps Black people on the reservation, frankly, of the left, because they use fear and they stoke emotion and they use lies against the opponents. And they basically are manufacturing these kinds of divisions. And it is of concern, but I don't think it reflects the vast majority of Americans, liberal or conservative. As I said, my left-wing liberal world, I've never heard anyone say this. And these are people that are classic leftists. They don't, they're not like conscious political leftists. They're just, their minds were occupied by the left at birth, probably. And, they never really stepped outside of it. Either
So
way,
what about just the
however,
great replacement? So that like Tucker Carlson, now you have Congress people stepping up and saying that the great replacement is a thing, and that's becoming, so to say, more and more normalized in certain circles of the Republican Party. So a few years ago, when Richard Spencer said it, he wasn't mainstream at all within the Republican Party, and he
we're
was
talking
talking
about the
about
great
the great
replacement.
replacement. And now
Talk
you
about
have Tucker Carlson and even some Republican congressmen saying that the great replacement is a real thing.
what is the great replacement as you define it?
Well, I don't, I mean, as the people who I debate against define it, that an active attempt to usually, according to most of them, orchestrated by Jews to make America a majority minority country, and so to say, to replace the historical white ruling class of America with non-whites. So, I mean, there's different levels. So there was a debate a few weeks ago whether the Great Replacement was real or not, regardless of, say, the roles of Jews within it. So some guy was saying that he believes the Great Replacement is happening, but he doesn't think Jews have anything to do with it. It's just a natural phenomenon And this guy was arguing against. He said that America should be concerned with the change in demographics and should try to retain being a majority white place, as opposed to the more extreme that would say the great replacement is a true phenomenon, and it's God forbid, being orchestrated by Jews. So if you look like Tucker Carlson, who might have we call like dog whistles, but you say the great replacement is real. There's an active effort by elites to actively try to diminish the white population, and then saying I'm actually in favor of immigration. And I would be saying, like Biden, that it's inevitable and it's a good thing that whites shouldn't have to. But I can't speak on behalf of whites to say that they shouldn't be worried about the demographic change. But just saying that the Great Replacement, God forbid, was the manifesto written by the Christchurch shooter who, God forbid, killed a bunch of innocent Muslims, and was also written in the manifesto of Christchurch, New Zealand, and in the Walmart shooting in Texas that quoted the Great Replacement. God forbid those guys were murderers killing innocent people. But to say Tucker Carlson talking about the need for immigration policy. Generally, I guess I'm defending the Great Replacement to a certain, if you say it's not a phenomenon, how you want to call it, but to say that demographics are changing and that there's policy and certain factors that are actively causing the trend and speeding the trend. And I guess I'm defending that.
Well, look, it's a complicated issue. There is going to be a massive change in the racial.
If you were going to debate, like, that's what I would suggest you would probably debate on, is the Great Replacement.
Look,
maybe one day you'll be debating Tucker Carlson, but he's probably the most prominent name. That's why the ADL wants to have Tucker Carlson shut down. He thinks Tucker Carlson shouldn't be able to. I don't
think he associates it with the Jews. Now,
he doesn't, but I'm saying he does think that it's a phenomenon.
Well, it probably is a phenomenon that everyone knows is true.
Maybe you agree with Tucker Carlson.
I don't agree with anybody. I'm simply noting that.
You agree that we need to stop immigration.
Can I say something here? I'm not agreeing. What I'm suggesting is that there is evidence that we are undergoing a huge demographic change in this country, and that it is going to be a majority non-white country probably by the year 2030. I think everyone acknowledges that. It's a very complex issue. I think everyone has strong feelings about it, including minorities, I may add, especially African.
Policy change could stop that. If you were a Republican just advocating to close immigration or change policy.
I don't think anyone's saying close immigration. They're saying that we don't want to have
repeal the 65 Hart-Celler Act.
Yeah, that we don't want to have illegal immigration.
As a Republican, would you be opposed to repealing the Hart-Celler Act?
What is the Hart-Celler Act?
It's the Immigration Act of 1965.
Would I be in favor of repealing it?
Yeah, but it was a liberal agenda passed by Johnson. Would you be in favor as a Republican of repealing the 1965 Immigration Hart-Celler Act?
I would have to look at the act. Probably not. That's the thing that was pushed by Kennedy. Look, my position, I think I'm more of interest look at immigration from an economic standpoint. Every society in the world has a right to regulate who enters their country out of the interests of their own citizens. Israel's a classic example, by the way.
And if they repealed the 1965 Immigration Hart-Celler Act, that would stop the rapid change in demographic change.
Well, I don't care about the demographic change. As I said,
I'm saying because you don't care about it, but you're saying that it's not inevitable in the sense that if they repealed the 1965 Immigration Act, it wouldn't be inevitable.
I think it probably is inevitable. I don't really care about it so much. I don't think it's a problem.
You're saying it's inevitable, but what happened if they repealed the 1965 Immigration Act? Would it still be inevitable?
Probably, and I don't think it matters. I think what matters is both the economic and the cultural questions. The economic question is whether or not the United States, as a sovereign entity, like any sovereign entity, has the right to regulate who comes in the country for economic reasons. Are enough Americans working? Do we have an unemployment problem? Do we have an economy that can generate enough income for people that they can contribute, or are they going to be collecting welfare? That's the issue for me. When my grandparents came to this country, they didn't get welfare. They came here, they had a charge, and they went to work immediately, and they did everything they could to Americanize. In fact, my great-grandmother was very much involved in bringing people into Boston, and she'd lie about things to get people immigrated into Boston. But once they were here, she would sign a document serving as a charge, taking responsibility for them for up to, I think, a year or two while they got on their feet and they went to work. My problem with it isn't whether or not someone's ethnic background. I don't care about that. The problem is whether or not our economy can sustain it and whether or not people are willing to assimilate into our culture like my great-grandparents did, whether or not they're willing to embrace American ideals, the American language, which is English, the American culture. This doesn't mean they have to give up their subculture. Look, my parents continue to be Jewish. That's not the issue, but they were as American as apple pie. They assimilated. That's the issue, not someone's ethnic or racial background. All ethnicities and races can do this, and many have done it even recently. For example, the Vietnamese boat people that came to this country in the late 1970s, several million of them, they have done a fantastic job of integrating into this country. They did not go on welfare. They did
But
not.
You're talking to the choir and saying, I'm like, me and you are basically in the
No,
same boat.
I don't think it has anything
You're
to do with
talking to the
race. I don't
choir.
care
I'm the
about a
right-
race.
I'm debating the non-Jewish, further right-leaning Republicans. Like these are the issues that they're bringing
Yeah, but I'm
up
not
with
sure.
me
I'm
as
not
a
sure
Jewish
that their
Republican.
motivation is race, though, Dooovid. I think their motivation on the right, mostly,
Well, I'm saying it's-
other than the Richard Spencers of the world, their motivation, their opposition to,
And Richard Spencer recanted and now is on the left.
Fine.
You know, saying
The point is
the
that
new
their
people that are arguing
motivation.
those points and
No,
like,
no, that's not true. The
as someone who
motivation,
largely agrees with you and saying you don't need to talk to the choir, I'm the one who's talking.
I
to these
understand, but
people
the
that are
motivation,
bringing up these issues.
yeah, the
on
motivation
further
of
right.
people like Tucker Carlson, not that I can speak for him, excuse me, not that I can speak for him, and of conservatives and of people on the right, I would contend the majority of them are, it's not an issue of race. It's an issue of culture. It's an issue of economics. And
Yeah,
every
but you're
nation,
preaching to the choir. You're not talking to
I
the people
understand
say
that, but I'm
you're not talking
saying,
to the people that
Dooovid,
say it
I
is an
am
issue of
saying
race.
that is the majority opinion of people on the right.
I'm not sure you're
of the
talking to the
established-
choir. You're not actually talking to the people on the further right.
Because they don't matter. They're people that are on the
Of course they
fringe.
matter.
They've always been there. They're not growing in number. Or the people on the far left who want to have black belts and who want to have separate blacks, like the Louis Farrakhan's. Those are fringe groups. The majority of Americans, yes, they're uncomfortable with massive immigration. Sure, we're all uncomfortable with the changing demographic, whether you admit it or not. But the main
I'm
issue
comfortable,
is,
but I'm not.
well,
I'm not
good for
afraid
you.
of it. I'm for
I'm
it.
happy for you. I'm probably for it too, but the point is, it does raise uncomfortable feelings in everyone, whether they admit it or not. And by the way, particularly Black people who see their jobs and their economic gains being frittered away by new immigrants. But putting that aside, the fact is that it is not the big problem. The big problem is economic and cultural, whether or not people are going to assimilate and acculturate to the American system, the American way of life. There is a certain something about our culture that is very unique. James Baldwin, the left-wing Black activist and author, I saw a quote from him recently. He left the country toward the end of his life. He was very bitter and he became like against America. He moved to Paris. But he pretty quickly noticed that he had a lot more in common with a white Texan than he did with an African or with a European. Not because there was something about the culture, there was something about the background, the way he carried himself, the habits, the mannerisms, that he identified more with another American. There is something, look, every nation has its own unique culture, and the question is whether or not we are going to have new guests come in who are going to contribute to our society economically by working, and whether or not they want to assimilate and become American. Now, there's a problem in Europe, as we know. I don't think there's any disputing on this with regard to Islamic immigration. So far, that hasn't been a problem in the United States. But in Europe, they're not assimilating. And that's not their fault either. That's the Europeans' fault as much as the new Muslim immigrants, because the Europeans tend to be very tribal and they tend to not want people to assimilate. Everybody's forming separate entities that don't talk to each other. The question is, in America, can we have new immigrants and can they be absorbed into our American culture? I think the conservative position is yes. Now, yeah, there are some people on the far right, as you say, They're worried, oh,
Well,
so
we're over time, and I mean, you're preaching to the choir here too.
Okay.
I'm trying to get you to preach to the people that are in opposition to us instead of preach to me. who
Well,
kind of
to them, I would
agrees
say
with
that,
you.
that they have nothing to worry
Well,
about based on some
don't tell it to me, tell
biological
it to them.
factor.
I'm trying to
All
book
right,
you
thank you,
to-
David. What I'd say to them is, don't worry about somebody's biological background. It has nothing to do with anything. What happens, what matters is their character. What matters is whether or not they want to be Americans and whether or not they have something to contribute and thus have a right to enjoy the blessings and benefits of being an American. Anyway,
Would you debate this, the bigger name? I guess his name's Brandon Martinez. He's actually
Sure.
a blue-eyed Hispanic, meaning he's
I'll
Spanish.
debate
He's not-
anybody, David.
on another platform. You'd go to Politically Provoked and do a
Yes.
formal debate with him.
I will do that debate. One of the things that with
Jay
my
Dyer is going to be on their channel tonight.
he's great. He's been a guest of mine many times. One of my main points in my book is that I defend the MAGA movement, as you might have noticed. Not that you didn't, and that I point out that it is progressive and that it has been under assault, and I get into why. But anyway, David, what do you have coming up on your show?
So tomorrow I'm debating this guy, Cultural Thug. I God forbid, I listened to his bio. Like I guess he killed a person in a fight, and originally was sentenced to life in prison. Then it got reduced to 3.5 years to for some sort of self-defense. And they said when he was in prison, he read, God forbid, Mein Kampf, and he said he was always selfish. I just watching his videos, he was always selfish his whole life, and he was impressed by how much Hitler cared for his people, and then he became a fascist. And I guess he calls himself a third positionist, which is actually, I mean, he's in Las Vegas, and it's actually a political party probably similar to based on the Italian fascist World War II, and that's what he's advocating. He's a pretty big name. Like he was kind of like Richard Spencer, like you spoke to him. He's got a PhD. He's very educated, well-read,
Right.
And upper class. So this guy, says he only has 6th grade education, and God forbid was in prison for murder, and got this way from reading Nazi books in prison. But he's used his time to be educated. He's avowed himself to the system, opening up a political party, and he's got a following. Saying like, yeah, I mean, this is relatively one of the more fringe third positionist, say like Tucker Carlson and general sentiment against immigration, great replacement. I'm sure this guy probably agrees with all that, but he's, I guess
sounds very fringy.
A fringe avowed, but
I'd love to debate him.
I mean, it makes kind of like the. Well, I'm going to be debating him tomorrow. I think we should debate this guy Martinez about the great replacement.
Happy to.
I'm not sure that. You need to bother debating these guys. But if he wants to come on to the show one Thursday and talk with him,
let's do it. Let's bring him on.
He seemed like honestly, like I think we could meet Cultural Thug in person, even despite his beliefs. Like I don't think he'd like attack me or try to beat me up, but he honestly believes these things and wants to convince more and more people that what he believes is true. And he's largely avowed himself to the system, has opened up a political party and trying to get people to run for office, specifically in Nevada.
Oh, lovely. I can't do the show next Thursday because it's Thanksgiving, or as it was called in the 1930s, Franksgiving, because Franklin Roosevelt fixed it so that it would be the third Thursday of every November. So
Hanukkah is right after that. Hanukkah comes very early this year.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we'd be back the next Thursday, and we have each other's contacts.
Yeah.
So if they do want to do this debate, schedule it. I'll just contact you.
Thank you.
And there'll be a big show. Like there'll probably be thousands of people, or at least hundreds of people watching, and maybe even tens of thousands of people would watch this debate if you did debate.
Thank you. I'd love to. Excellent. Thanks a lot, Dooovid.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom to you. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.